Okay, so welcome to Go Green Wilmette's Protecting Lake Michigan webinar featuring experts from the University of Michigan. Our program tonight focuses on all things plastic pollution in the Great Lakes and specifically Lake Michigan. We will talk about what plastic is, how it's causing damage to animals, ecosystems, and even us, and importantly, what actions we can take to stop plastic pollution from overwhelming our lakes and beaches. We have two speakers tonight. First up is Lara O'Brien, recent graduate of the University of Michigan, founder of balloondebris.org. I'll put that link in the chat, which is a citizen science website that she will definitely talk about later. And she is also a soon-to-be intern at NASA doing incredible work for Indigenous communities in Central America. Second up will be me. I am María Dabrowski, a current graduate student at the University of Michigan and previous Wilmette resident, also part of Go Green Wilmette. We'll both introduce ourselves more thoroughly in our presentations. So without further ado, Lara will start our talk about plastics.
All right, well, thank you so much for that introduction. And thank you all for joining. This is an incredibly important topic as we're going to be discussing plastic pollution and how it is impacting the Great Lakes and Lake Michigan and you all closer to home. So, sorry, let me set everything up. So as was just stated, my name is Lara O'Brien, and I'm a recent graduate from the University of Michigan School for Environment and Sustainability, where I earned a Master of Science degree in Conservation Ecology and Geospatial Data Sciences. I also have a Master of Arts degree in Geography from the University of Kansas, and I'm the founder of the Balloon Debris Survey, which you can find at balloondebris.org, which is a citizen science study aimed at mapping balloon litter and raising awareness of the dangers of balloon debris and plastic pollution in the Great Lakes and beyond. And I'll be discussing this study a little bit closer to the end of the presentation. So plastic pollution is one of the greatest threats to the environment, to wildlife, and to human health. Plastics are now so pervasive that they've been found everywhere in our environment and ecosystem, from the summit of Mount Everest to the deepest parts of the ocean. It's in the snow, it's in the rain, it's in the soil, it's in our drinking water, our food, and even the air we breathe. We are producing more plastic and single-use plastics than ever before. Plastic will never go away or biodegrade, but will remain forever in our environment, continuing to build up over time. So it takes many decades, even centuries, for plastics to degrade. And even then, they do not disappear. They simply break down into smaller and smaller pieces, leaching toxic chemicals into the surrounding environment as they do. So it's been estimated that 8.3 billion tons of plastic has been produced since the early 1950s, when it first started to be mass produced. And more than 380 million tons of plastic is produced every single year, with about 50% being single use. And the United States alone creates about almost 36 million tons of plastic every single year. And in 2019 produced 53 kilograms, or about 117 pounds of single-use plastic per person. And then during the COVID pandemic, the plastic pollution crisis was exacerbated. The use of disposable goods went up nearly 30 to 50%. And plastic production is expected to triple by 2050, which will have an even more devastating impact on the environment and climate. Plastic is a byproduct of oil and natural gas and is a significant driver of climate change. The oil industry makes more than $400 billion a year making plastic. And as demand for oil for cars and trucks declines, the future profits will increasingly become from plastic. And by 2050, plastics are expected to cause 1.3 billion tons of greenhouse gas emissions, as much as 300 new coal-fired power plants, which is about 5% to 10% of all greenhouse gas emissions. And as fossil fuel byproduct, plastic pollutes at every stage of its life, from fracking to oil pipelines to production to waste and degradation. And all too often, it's the low income and minority communities that bear the consequences. So who are the biggest producers? A recent study just out this month, or last month, found that 20 petrochemical companies that manufactured polymers needed to create plastics, including polyethylene used in plastic bags and polystyrene, are responsible for 55% of the world's single-use plastic waste, which is about 130 million metric tons. And the top 100 companies are responsible for 90%. ExxonMobil produces the most, which is about 5.9% of all single-use plastic waste. Dow in the US is second at 5.6%, and China's Sinopec is third at 5.3%. So who are the biggest plastic polluters? Well, for the last 3 years, Coca-Cola, Pepsi, and Nestle have been found to be the top 3 brands that produce the most plastic waste around the world. Coca-Cola was the worst. It produces about 3 million tons of plastic packaging a year, which is equivalent to about 200,000 bottles per minute. So last year, they claimed that they would not abandon plastic because their customers still demanded it and still wanted it. And after this huge uproar, after that statement made a huge uproar, earlier this year, they backtracked and they've announced that they will soon begin selling sodas in 100% recycled plastic in the US for the first time. But I think we'll have to wait and see if that actually happens. So what about plastic recycling? Globally, only 9% of all plastic made has been recycled. And in 2019, just 2% of single-use plastic was made from recycled polymers. So what's going on? Recycling plastic is incredibly difficult and expensive to pick up, to sort, to melt down. And there's hundreds of different kinds of plastics that have to be separated and can't be melted down together. And plastic also degrades each time it's recycled. So it has to be downcycled and made into inferior products, which can only be done once or twice before it becomes waste. And with the cost of oil and natural gas so low, it's far cheaper for manufacturers to just make new virgin plastic. And actually, recycled plastic is seen as a competition. I mean, their main goal is to try to sell as much oil and gas as possible. So it's not in their best interest to actually recycle the waste. So starting back as far back as the 1970s, the industry has spent millions on marketing the myth that most plastic could be and will be recycled. And this has been to try to convince the public to keep buying more plastic and be less concerned about its impact on the environment. And they've also put the blame and responsibility of dealing with plastic waste on the consumers through both anti-littering and recycling campaigns, all while they continue to produce more and more plastic. So where does all of this plastic end up? Well, it's usually in landfills. It's also exported legally and illegally to other nations. China was the largest importer of plastic waste until 2017, when it stopped accepting plastic waste. Now more waste is being shipped to less developed nations, including those in Southeast Asia and Western Africa that have less environmental regulations and also have no means to manage the huge influx of plastic. There's also some plastic that is incinerated, which also releases toxic chemicals into the air. And a lot of the plastic eventually ends up in the environment. It's estimated that about 8 million metric tons of plastic waste enters the ocean every single year. And I'm sure you've heard the horrible statistic that by 2050, more plastic than fish will be in the ocean. Besides the ocean, it also pollutes other natural areas, including farmland, rivers, and lakes. So while plastic has been studied in the ocean in great detail, plastic pollution in the Great Lakes is only beginning to be understood and examined. A 2016 report by the Rochester Institute of Technology has estimated that more than 22 million pounds or 11,000 tons of plastic ends up in the Great Lakes every single year, and half of that ends up in Lake Michigan. So most of the plastic waste in Lake Michigan is left over by beachgoers and boaters. It's also carried in from storm drains, rivers, and streams. Plastic debris is also deposited by the wind and currents and accumulates primarily along the shorelines, which includes the beaches, the lake surface, the water column, and bottom sediments. And the highest concentrations have been found around urban areas like Chicago and Detroit. And according to the Alliance for the Great Lakes, in 2019, 90% of all the litter they picked up from the Great Lakes beaches was plastic. And that's especially styrofoam and microplastics, which were the most common. So microplastic occurs when larger plastics break down over time from the sun, from heat, from wind, from waves, from abrasion, and they become microplastics, which also enter the lakes from wastewater treatment plants, stormwater, and agricultural runoff. Most microplastic is in the form of microfibers that are released when washing synthetic clothing or also become airborne. And it's estimated that an average of 9 million microfibers are released every time we do laundry. And they are so small that they are unable to be filtered out by wastewater treatment plants. And so microplastics and microfibers have been found to be contaminating our drinking water and beer sourced from the Great Lakes. So all of this plastic is not only polluting the environment, it's also extremely harmful to wildlife. Birds, fish, and other wildlife can be injured or killed from ingesting plastic debris or getting entangled in discarding fishing line, plastic bags, rope, and other debris. Toxins from ingesting the plastic have also been shown to be harmful for breeding and impair immune systems. And an estimated 100,000 marine mammals and 1 million seabirds die from plastic each year, though it's thought to be much higher than that. And numbers for wildlife fatalities in the Great Lakes is unknown. So microfibers are the primary type of plastic being consumed by fish in the Great Lakes. It's been found in their gills, their digestive systems, and even their muscle tissue. It's been found to have harmful effects on their digestion, their metabolism, their growth, and brain functions. And plastic is also attracts and absorbs other contaminants in the surrounding water, leading to fish consuming higher concentrations of toxins. Plastic is now so pervasive through the entire food chain. It's found in the zooplankton and other invertebrates, to fish, birds, and other wildlife, and ultimately humans. So what does this mean for human consumption of plastic? It's been estimated that an average American consumes between 39,000 to 52,000 pieces of microplastic every single year. Globally, humans are ingesting an average of 2,000 pieces, which is about 5 grams of microplastic every single week. And that's equivalent to the plastic in a credit card. And we can do our best to reduce exposure by using reusable water bottles and non-plastic food containers, but it's impossible to completely avoid plastic consumption. And that's because plastic is in our food, it's in our water, it's in salt, it's in our fruits and vegetables, it's in the air we breathe. It's impossible to avoid. So what does this mean for human health? The effect of plastic ingestion and inhalation in the body is still largely unknown, but could have a wide range of serious health effects, causing diabetes, obesity, infertility, respiratory inflammation, damage to our immune, endocrine, and nervous systems, and also cancer as well. And a 2020 study revealed nanoplastic contamination was found in all major filtering organs, our lungs, liver, spleen, and kidneys. Nanoplastics have also been found in human placentas, which could cause long-term developmental damage to fetal health, including affecting the developing immune system. BPA, PFAS, phthalates, and other chemical additives found in everyday plastics have also been found to cause adverse health effects, though more research on long-term effects is still needed. They've been found to cause developmental effects in infants, lower fertility rates in women, cause hormonal imbalance, and affect the immune system. So what can we do? It seems like an overwhelming problem, and it is. One of the best things that we can do is call your representatives, demand that they pass the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act of 2020. Because to begin to solve this plastic crisis, we have to stop production at the source, and it will take policy change at the very highest levels to hold plastic producers and polluters accountable. So the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act would include pausing all new plastics facilities, makes big polluters take responsibility for their products, it stops shipping plastic waste to developing countries, and requires big polluters to fund recycling and composting. Another thing we can do is divest from the banks funding the plastic production. Nearly 60% of the funding for plastic waste comes from just 20 global banks. $30 billion of loans from these institutions, including Barclays, HSBC, and Bank of America, has been supporting the sector since 2011. So something else we can do is just try to reduce our consumption as much as we can. We can do that by switching to reusable products. We can donate, swap, or sell products. We can also avoid synthetic clothing. We can buy thrift clothing and mend our old clothing. We can also support sustainable brands. And also just it's important to do your research because there's a lot of corporate greenwashing out there. So just make sure that the brands that you choose are actually doing what they say. And then just look for ways that you can get involved. The plastic crisis is also a climate issue. It's an environmental justice issue. It's a public health issue. It's a wildlife conservation issue. It's a water issue. There's so many facets to this problem that it can become overwhelming. So just finding ways to help and be involved that feels right to you, and then look for organizations that most align with your interests. For example, if you're passionate about birds, see if there's a way to volunteer with your local Audubon Society, and also discuss with the members if there's ways to study the effects of plastic on birds in your area. Social media is also a great way to learn about the issue and connect with organizations and other activists working to spread awareness about the plastics. You can also help volunteer at beach and litter cleanups, and Maria will discuss this more in depth in her talk. But every single piece of litter that you pick up does help the environment and wildlife. Even picking up litter in your own neighborhood makes a huge difference, as it can stop plastic waste from entering the storm drains and ultimately finding its way to the lakes. And then also another really big thing that you can do is just talk with your friends and family about the issue and share information about how they can get involved in ways that they can help. Another way to make a huge impact is to participate in citizen science studies that look at plastic waste. Citizen science is a way for anyone, anywhere to help gather information and data that can be used by researchers, scientists, environmental organizations, policymakers, and other members of the general public to understand and learn more about an issue, in this case, plastic waste. For example, the Break Free from Plastics brand audit is an annual citizen science action initiative that involves counting the brands on plastic waste found in communities across the globe. This past year, they had over 14,000 volunteers who conducted 575 brand audits across 55 different countries. They collected almost 350,000 pieces of plastic waste, 63% of which was marked with a clear consumer brand. This led to the findings that Coca-Cola, Pepsi, and Nestle are the worst polluters, which is bringing awareness and can help hold them accountable. Another citizen science survey that you can help with is called Literati. It's a free app that allows you to report waste, including the type and location, found anywhere in the world. It is all open access, so anyone can use this data to get companies, organizations, and governments to create positive environmental policy changes. Another study is called Birds and Debris. It's run by researchers at the Environmental Research Institute in the UK. And this is where you can report the location and photo of an entangled bird or a nest incorporation of debris, with the goal of studying how birds are impacted by the global plastic waste crisis. And then I also started the Balloon Debris Survey in 2019 while I was at the University of Michigan, as a way to bring more awareness to one specific type of plastic that is often overlooked, which is balloons, and hopefully help influence changes in behavior and policy. Sorry, that's my cat. So I'll go a little bit more in depth about the balloon project. So balloon releases are still quite common at weddings, birthdays, memorials, graduations, and other events where groups come together and initially release helium balloons into the air as part of a celebration. And this is just one example from a D-Day remembrance ceremony in France in 2017. Balloon releases are also common at sporting events, and this was taken at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway in 2019, where it has been where it's been a long-standing tradition to release approximately 40,000 balloons at the start of the Indy 500. And last year was the first time that it did not happen. That was because of the pandemic and lack of public spectators. So while there might be good intentions behind these events, every single balloon will eventually land as litter. Helium balloons can stay afloat for up to 2 weeks and travel hundreds, even thousands of miles before landing and polluting oceans, lakes, forests, and other natural areas. There are 2 different types of balloons. These pictures here are examples of the mylar or foil balloon, which is made of thin sheets of nylon with a metallic coating. And these are single-use plastics that will never biodegrade. There was even a recent article that just came out, I think a couple weeks ago, that mentioned a man who found a mylar balloon that his grandmother had given him the day he was born, and it was still inflated and in perfect condition 30 years later. Mylar balloons are also able to conduct electricity and are responsible for thousands of power outages every single year when they come into contact with power lines. These examples are of latex balloons. For years, balloon manufacturers and sellers have been falsely marketing latex balloons as biodegradable. And this is not the case. Natural latex, which is made from liquid rubber, is biodegradable. However, latex balloons are mixed with plasticizers and other chemical additives that hinder the biodegradation process. There are also synthetic latex balloons made from the petroleum derivative neoprene, which will never biodegrade, only degrading into microplastics over time. Sorry. And latex balloons also pop and shred in the atmosphere. So when floating on the water, they resemble jellyfish or squid, the favorite prey of seabirds, sea turtles, and other marine life. So beyond polluting the environment, balloon debris poses a significant threat to wildlife, livestock, and pets, as they can be injured from ingesting the debris, getting entangled in the long balloon ribbons and strings, or by being spooked by the falling debris. A recent study found that latex balloons are actually the deadliest form of marine debris for seabirds, as they are 32 times more likely to kill than hard plastics when ingested. The Ocean Conservancy has also ranked balloons just behind abandoned fishing gear and plastic bags and utensils as the deadliest form of ocean trash for marine life due to the high risk of death from ingestion and entanglement. So between 2016 and 2018, volunteers with the Alliance of the Great Lakes picked up more than 18,000 pieces of balloon debris. In 2019, the Ocean Conservancy recorded more than 104,000 balloons worldwide, with more than half in the United States. In 2019, only 5 states, including California, Connecticut, Florida, Tennessee, and Virginia, had passed laws prohibiting the intentional release of balloons in order to protect the environment and wildlife. So in order to raise awareness about the issue in the Great Lakes and hopefully help get a similar law passed in Michigan and other Great Lakes states, I created an online citizen science survey to help gather data about balloon debris in the region. A link to the survey, along with maps, photos, and more information can be found at balloondebris.org. And using the survey, volunteers can help record the location, photo, and other information about the balloons they find. This data is immediately uploaded onto an interactive dashboard, an interactive map, that provides a powerful visualization of where released balloons end up and just how widespread the issue really is. So this is a screenshot of the latest map of the debris surveys submitted around the Great Lakes region. And this data can also be used to help create heat maps, which show potential hotspots where higher concentrations of balloons might occur. And in the United States, balloons float eastward with prevailing west-east winds. And in the Great Lakes region, higher concentrations of balloon debris have been found along the eastern shores of Lake Michigan and Huron. And this includes the Indiana Sand Dunes National Park, located in southeast of Chicago, where volunteers have regularly come across balloons, including one who found 84 different balloons in a single morning along a 2-mile stretch of beach. And since I began the study in June 2019, more than 800 surveys have been submitted documenting over 2,600 pieces of debris in the region, as well as from other areas of the country and as far away as the UK and Australia. And this study has been featured by the Detroit Free Press, the USA Today, Associated Press, and others. And this media coverage, along with increased public awareness, has helped persuade lawmakers in the region to begin drafting legislation. And this includes Illinois, that just passed recently the House Bill 418, which was introduced by State Rep. Sam Engling, that bans intentional balloon releases of 50 balloons or more, and it will now go to the state Senate for approval. So more cities and states are passing similar bills, and hopefully Michigan will do so soon as well. So it just shows that citizen science can make a difference and actually get policies introduced. So there are things that you can do, and I just hope that you can find ways to get involved, and do whatever you can. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Lara. That was amazing. Lara and I met when I reached out to her to talk about this balloon study way back in 2019. So I will now get my PowerPoint all ready to go. And I will bring things back to a Vilmette focus really quick. So let's see. Okay. So Again, protecting Lake Michigan, a talk about plastic pollution, this time from a more Wilmette angle. I want to start off with a brief land acknowledgement. I am currently a student in Ann Arbor, but I also have done a lot of work in Wilmette, so this land acknowledgement combines both of those places that are near and dear to my heart. Wilmette was founded in 1829 in part through the Treaty of, I cannot speak French, so pardon me, Prairie du Chien Archange Wilmette on land from the Potawatomi Nation. Our other ancestral and current stewards of this land include the Kickapoo, Peoria, and Miami tribes. As I mentioned, I'm currently a student in Ann Arbor. The University of Michigan was founded on land ceded by the Council of the Three Fires, an alliance of the Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi nations, who are also known as the Anishinaabeg. The Anishinaabeg stewarded and cared for this land for hundreds of years prior to the arrival and occupation of colonizers and continue to do so today. I'm privileged to be working on and benefiting from these lands and waters. I readily acknowledge that these lands, like many throughout the continent, were often not ceded peacefully, but under the threat and action of genocide, violence, and theft. These actions were taken to benefit the colonial powers and have left a disturbing legacy in their wake. These words will never undo history, but now in going forward, I will use my voice and actions to unlearn and learn anew, to prioritize restoring relationships with Indigenous peoples, and to stand in solidarity with the Potawatomi, Anishinaabe, and other tribes. And I encourage everyone to just kind of keep in mind the land that they're on. I know we're coming from all different places now and going forward. So another brief introduction about me. I'm a graduate student at the University of Michigan's School for Environment Sustainability. I'm currently studying behavior, education, and communication, which is just fancy words for science communication and thinking about why we behave the way we do or why we don't behave the way we do. I also study conservation ecology, so figuring out how we can conserve the different ecosystems around the planet, particularly the ocean. The photo on the farthest right is me scuba diving, which I was very fortunate to be able to do and is a deep love of mine. And then I am also, this other photo is me standing in front of the School for Environment Sustainability at the University of Michigan. I still haven't actually been in the building because of the pandemic, but fingers crossed this fall. I'm also the current Communications and Community Outreach Associate for Go Green Wilmette. I'll talk a little bit about how I connected with Go Green Wilmette a few years ago later in the presentation. I also want to start out with a story because I feel like stories help us realize on a personal level what's going on. And so this is a story that happened recently in December of 2020. It in no way was my introduction to plastic issues, but it was something that really reinforced why I'm doing what I do today, especially at school. So I was at Gilson Park, which is a park in Wilmette, to watch the sunrise. You can tell there was very little sunrise. It's at the beginning was very gray. I decided to do a quick beach cleanup. These are some nurdles, and I'll talk a little bit more about what nurdles are in a little bit, but I was just on the beach enjoying myself. I actually went to Evanston where the sun did rise in a very beautiful and majestic way. It was a wonderful time. I was really enjoying myself. It was, again, December 2020, a few days prior to Christmas. It was just great. I was able to watch a beaver, some of the part of the beaver family in the Evanston Lakeville, and it was just wonderful. I was having a great time. I decided to go back to Gilson, to the Wilmette Harbor, to continue photographing birds because now I was just in a great mood. I took a photo of this bird. I didn't really think much of it. Continued photographing other birds. Here are some hooded mergansers. If anyone is interested in birding, one of the beautiful things about Lake Michigan is that it attracts a lot of bird species year-round. But then I took another photo of this duck, and something looked a little odd because she hadn't moved. And she seemed to be very attached to this one specific rope. I didn't know if she was trying to feed on something there. I wasn't quite sure. Other ducks came and passed her, but I felt kind of weird about the whole situation. So I zoomed in on my camera and I saw that her beak was stuck. And I couldn't tell what was making it stuck, but it was stuck. And I could tell that she was still alive because every so often she would do this very aggravated dance in the water as though she was trying to pull herself away from this rope. So I got up about 6:30 for the sunrise. And at this point, it was around 9 a.m., and I wasn't quite sure what to do. So I called the non-emergency police number at Wilmette, and they gave me the phone number for the Flint Creek Wildlife Rehab Center, which is about 45 minutes away from Wilmette, going west. And I said, I think there's a duck that's stuck. And they asked me if I had a boat. I said no. They asked me if I had friends who had boats. I was scrambling to think of who I knew who could have, a kayak or something. But then it was also really cold. And so I was wondering what the safest option would be. Because of COVID, any volunteers that could help from Flint Creek would take about 3 hours to get there. And so we were trying to figure out how to navigate this potential duck rescue in a very safe and COVID safe and friendly way. And then I realized through a crazy series of events that I was able to get a hold of Mr. Perce Hyde, who is the head of operations at the Wilmette Harbor. I left him a voicemail, and then I sent him a text, and I had never spoken with him before. But I explained the situation, and he came down to the Wilmette Harbor and helped put a boat in the water. At this point, it was around 11 a.m. I was frozen. This was the day where it was right before when the temperatures were starting to drop pretty severely around Christmas time. So I was getting cold. I bumped into family friends. I would love to give a shout out to the Goldman family, who I'm pretty sure are on tonight. They brought me some tea and sweatpants because I was shivering. But Mr. Hyde and I decided that because it would take so long for rescue to get there, that we were going to try and do it ourselves. Normally, that's not how wildlife rescue works. But because of COVID, because of the cold, because of all the different factors, we decided it would be best to try and do it ourselves. And we got permission, of course, from the Wildlife Rehab Center to do so. So here is Mr. Perce getting the boat. There are no boats in the water at this time. It's winter. Here, Mr. Perce is getting the boat ready to go. Here we are in the water. I can attest that the water is very cold in the winter. In case anyone was curious, Lake Michigan is in fact freezing. And I don't have any photos of what happened next because it was intense. We had to unhook the rope that she was stuck on from where it was wrapped around. And then we noticed that the reason that she was stuck was because there was fishing line that was wrapped incredibly tightly around her beak and also incredibly tightly around the rope itself. So she was kind of tethered to the rope. We did get her. We were able to undo the rope and then cut the fishing line off from where it attached to the rope and get her safely out of the water. Here she is. We had just driven from Ann Arbor to Chicago with our cat. So the duck was put into the cat carrier. It was kind of a very convenient thing because I had to drive the duck to the rehab center. So it worked out really nicely. Here we are. So again, a 45-minute journey. I think she hissed at me every 3 minutes the entire time. She was not happy, but she would be later. So I realized during this time, I'm relatively new to birding, but I had done quite a little bit of research on ducks. So I realized she was an anzig, which is the Ojibwe word for merganser. In English, it's the common merganser, and scientific name is Mergus merganser. Here's a photo of her in between her hissing fits when we were on the way. And then this is the wonderful woman from the Flint Creek Wildlife Rehab Center who was doing an initial look. And when we got there, she could tell that the duck was bleeding from its side and was starting to go into shock and was breathing very laboredly and not doing so well. She said that the prognosis was not so good, and she ran inside to take care of the duck. And I drove home and I was really upset because we had done the right thing by trying to rescue this duck. She wouldn't have survived the temperatures, not being able to move, and she would have starved and become dehydrated and passed. But I was just so upset that it was this plastic fishing cord. And I later asked my cousin about that fishing line, and he said it's notorious amongst fishers because it often gets stuck among rocks. And instead of trying to remove the entire line, fishers tend to just cut it because it's impossible. So I was so mad. I drove home. Some tears were shed. It was just a bad time. And this happened again in December. And I assumed that the duck would pass because she was in really rough shape. And so I reached out. Flint Creek is amazing, but they are also swamped. And so they don't necessarily have the resources to respond to every wildlife rescue. But I did reach out to see what the duck was up to. And it turns out that on January 17th, I got a response that she is still with us. So she actually survived the pretty serious injuries. And she presumably, I didn't want to keep bothering them, but she presumably was released late winter, early spring, when these ducks that breed in northern Canada, some species of these ducks breed in the Arctic, when they migrate back north. So you can see in my response, she survived. Oh my gosh, I was really, really happy. And this is a positive outcome, right? So this is definitely not always how the story ends. And as Lara mentioned, some of these wildlife is just impacted in a number of ways by plastic. So let's again take it a little bit more local. The problem, plastic pollution statistics. So as Lara mentioned, 11 million pounds of plastic end up in Lake Michigan alone each year. 11 million pounds is one of those numbers that's kind of hard to wrap your head around. It is 100 Olympic-sized pools filled with plastic water bottles. But a lot of the pollution that we have in the lakes is not plastic water bottles, it's microplastics. So if you think about how many tiny pieces of plastic you would need to fill up approximately 100 Olympic-sized pools to get that same weight, that's a lot of pollution. And that's a lot of chances for that pollution to end up in our food and water or in wildlife or just degrade the ecosystems, variety of ecosystems in Lake Michigan in a lot of ways. And that study was done by the Rochester Institute of Technology. Also, 93% of fish in the Chicago River, which leads to Lake Michigan, have some sort of plastic inside of them. And that study was done by Friends of the Chicago River. 93% is a massive amount. And of course, further studies are necessary to corroborate this, but that is pretty on par with a variety of other studies around the world that have looked at plastic ingestion in fish and other animals such as sea turtles. There was a study on sea turtles that looked at, I think, 20 hatchlings, so baby turtles that had washed up dead, and 100% of them had ingested plastic. And that was a cause of death in the majority of those cases. Many water systems are not actually equipped to filter out nanoplastics. So microplastics are small, nanoplastics are even smaller. And nanoplastics, as Lara mentioned, could be things like the fibers from your laundry. And those are things that we ingest because we can't. Our water systems, including Chicago's water system, is not equipped to filter out those types of plastics. Microplastics, pieces of plastic less than 5 millimeters in length, small, still visible, but small. They can exist on their own. So nurdles, which I will talk about a little bit later, can be microplastics that exist. That's what they are. They don't break down, or they can break down from bigger pieces of plastics. Waves can break them down, waves against the rocks. We have rocks along Wilmette beaches that can batter plastics, but also UV light causes plastics to become brittle and break down into smaller pieces. So those are a couple of ways that microplastics can form. Plastics are made from oil and natural gas. Those contribute to pollution in other ways, to air pollution. And of course, that's one of the biggest issues of our time is pollution in the atmosphere. So microplastics are a big issue and nanoplastics are a big issue. One of the more challenging ones to tackle because they are so small and pervasive. I also want to talk a little bit about other ways that plastic might influence our ecosystems in ways that we don't necessarily think about. So one thing, and this is all related, so coastal beach erosion. Chestnut Beach, that was located by Langdon Park in Wilmette, is gone. There may be some years where it comes back if the lake levels subside a little bit, but it's gone. That means vital habitat is gone, and that makes the existing habitat even more important. So Gilson Beach and Elmwood Dunes, even more important because the habitat that animals used prior on Chestnut is completely gone. Again, rising lake water levels. We are, according to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, about to break record levels again. The water just keeps getting higher and higher. Again, that removes important habitat. If you are close to Chicago, you may have heard of Monty and Rose. Those are the piping plovers, a species of shorebird that rely on clean beach habitat. They're nesting this year, and they have been for the last 3 years. Very important, but it's important to keep what habitat we do have safe and clean for animals and for us. No one wants their dogs to go to the dog beach and eat plastic. And then an interesting study that just came out by Lavers et al. In 2021 found that plastic can actually warm sand up because it acts as an insulator. This can, of course, be really bad for any animals that use beaches to nest, such as turtles. And we have some species of turtles that use sandy areas, whether it's Lake Michigan or other lakes in the area. They use those sandy areas to lay eggs. And so if there is plastic, that can raise the overall temperature of the sand and cause damage for their offspring. Just different ways that plastic is starting to influence ecosystems in kind of novel ways. And then Lara also mentioned greenwashing. And here's just a quick greenwashing warning. People talk about biodegradable plastics. So what does that mean? So if a plastic degrades, that can include traditional plastics. Degrading just means to break down into smaller pieces. It does not mean to go away. Biodegradable plastics are pieces of plastic that break down into water, carbon dioxide, and compostable materials, if the conditions are right. Compostable plastics also break down into water, carbon dioxide, compost, and other inorganic compounds, if the conditions are right. So the key here is that sometimes companies will say, well, we have biodegradable plastics, or we have compostable plastics. But that doesn't always mean that that's better. If conditions are not good, or if compostable plastics aren't taken to an industrial compost facility, it can mean that those take ages to break down, right? And so in that time can break down into small pieces that are ingested by animals. And that time can cause something to get entangled in something. So just because it says biodegradable plastic, or it's a green plastic, or a sustainable plastic, it doesn't always mean that it's better. And so then the ultimate question is, are these actually better than plastic, or is it just greenwashing? Biodegradable and compostable plastics can actually use more pollution in the form of pesticides and fertilizers to create the plants that are needed to create those plastics. Those plants can be sugarcane, corn. Those things take up a lot of land as well, land that could be used for native plants, for example. And then the pollutants that are released at the different levels of processing for these bioplastics are also not so great for the environment. So ultimately, from the production to what their impact in the ecosystems, especially water ecosystems, they're not necessarily better than plastics. And so that's something really important, that just because something says green or sustainable or eco-friendly, it doesn't necessarily mean that. And a lot of people don't have access to biodegradable or facilities for biodegradation or facilities for composting. So something to just keep in the back of your head. Bringing your own stuff is almost always better than using one of these biodegradable or compostable plastics. So, Wilmette's beach cleanup program. I moved back home after college, as many of my peers have, and I was walking along the beach often and collecting trash often because it was everywhere. And I wondered if Wilmette had any sort of program where we did beach cleanups more frequently than once a year. So I took this photo and I sent an email to Beth Drucker, who's the head of Go Green Wilmette, and I asked if there was such a thing. And if not, if I could start such a thing. And Go Green Wilmette said yes. I became an intern for them, and then soon after became the communications and community outreach associate, with the beach cleanup being kind of my pet project. And so these two photos, the one on the right is my hand. If you get the beach cleanup emails reminders, you'll have seen this photo. It's my hand. And then this photo on the left-hand side is a bunch of microplastics that I collected and cleaned, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. There's something kind of hauntingly beautiful. It's so colorful and inviting almost, until you realize what they are. So this will be our third year of doing beach cleanups. We've had 200 plus, I counted this morning, over 220 attendees since 2019, including groups like the NCL, which is a mother-daughter volunteer group, and members of the Wilmette Coast Guard Station. So thank you, anyone who's on who has participated. Thank you so much. This photo on the bottom left is the photo of all the trash that we collected in the first cleanup. Again, if you remember how small the majority of plastics that end up on our beaches are, this amount is pretty wild. And then the photo on the right is of some NCL members. Just a couple more photos of the first beach cleanup. It was such an exciting day just seeing everyone on the dog beaches where we began, in the sand, sifting for microplastics and doing their part. Was really exciting. People ask, we often get the question, well, Wilmette doesn't have any trash. What are you talking about? We do. Absolutely, we do. A lot of trash gets stuck in the dune grass, but again, a lot of the trash is these microplastics, harder to see. So some of the most common things that we find, starting from the left, straws, shotgun shell casings. You can see, I'm not sure if everyone can see my mouse, but there's one here, it's all in sort of the middle. These often break down, so you'll see only a fragment of shotgun shell casings. Cigarettes, which are either one or two of the most commonly polluted items in the world. They have plastic filters, so they can't break down and continue to pollute and leach out toxic chemicals. Nurdles. Nurdles are virgin pieces of plastic, so plastics that have never been molded into anything else before. They are the step in between when the plastic is created at plastic factories, and then that plastic is transported. There was a nurdle spill, I believe, in Lake Erie. All the Great Lakes are connected, so it was only a matter of time before nurdles started ending up on the shores of Lake Michigan. And so if you go to the beach and you think, I don't see anything, I encourage you to look closer, because once you see one, you'll see 1,000, and you can't escape. They are everywhere. And then microplastics, again, in this photo on the right, I did measure, that is 5 millimeters or less, and that is a microplastic. So just kind of a visual of what those can look like. Again, they are everywhere. We get a lot of styrofoam and foam particles, really hard to clean up. They blow away really easily. We get wrappers. So in the photo of me holding a glove, McDonald's wrappers, lots of other organizations, not just pointing out McDonald's, this just happens to be one that's pretty visible. We get bottle caps, we get Swisher mouthpieces often, and we get other weird things. We have gotten far too many diapers. That's just never pleasant, and I encourage people to come to beach cleanups with a pair of reusable gloves, because that's disgusting. We get a lot of funky things, a lot of things you can expect and things that you don't. We also find critters. And so first of all, the rack line is this line here you can see in the photo on the left. It's where the high tide pushes up any organic debris and also inorganic debris like plastics. But in that rack line, a lot of animals go, or a lot of animals feast off of animals in the rack line. So birds, for example. This photo on the right is of spotted pink lady beetles. They are on an acorn. They are native to the US. They eat aphids and pollen, and as somebody who likes to garden and is allergic to pollen, I'm very thankful for them. But if you remove this organic material, they struggle. So it's important when doing cleanups wherever you are on a beach, to save the rack line. So don't just scoop everything up. Take what's stuck in the rack line, leave the rack line there. A couple of things to note. Beach cleanups can take time, and cleanups in general take time. It's a long process, but each piece of plastic removed can save a life and protect us too. The fishing line that we ended up removing from the rope will hopefully prevent any more ducks in the future, or any other organisms in general, from potentially dying, right? So even though it can be a really challenging thing to keep going, it does make a difference. This photo here at the top was how it looked when I began. For the day, there was a lot of plastic everywhere. Again, microplastics, hard to see. The middle bar is what it looked like after I had taken all of the colorful plastics out, so it looks a little bit better because you can't see the the white pieces, the brown pieces, the black pieces, and the gray pieces. Those are all, and then the clear pieces. Those are all harder to see. And then the third bar is what it looked like when I was finally done. And it took me about 25 minutes to do just this tiny little part because there was that much plastic in the sand. Obviously, some days are worse, some days are better, but it takes time, and it's important to know that, but it is worth it. And that's perhaps even more important to know. So some solutions, Lara touched on them. I'm going to touch on them again because why not hammer home these important points? And I'll try and connect them as much as possible to how we can do so in Wilmette. So we've heard reduce, reuse, recycle. I think if you're in kindergarten or older, you've probably heard that phrase before. This triangle is a little bit different. It's a little bit more robust. So let's start with rethink, and that is rethinking if you need to consume something in the first place. And of course, I want to point out that rethinking that we're all in different positions, right? When I was able to travel to Southeast Asia, the water there is not safe. I had to get plastic water bottles. So that's a can of worms for another time. But not everyone has the ability to necessarily rethink. Taking it much closer to home for me, Flint still doesn't have access to clean water. Grand Rapids has many places that don't have access to clean water. Those are two cities in Michigan. And so rethink when you can, rethink when it's in your power and ability to do so. That's a big caveat. Refuse, again, if it's within your power to refuse a straw or refuse a plastic bag or refuse a carry-out container because you brought your own. Refuse what you can when you can, and know that there will be times when that's impossible to do, but that's also okay. You do what you can. And then reduce. Reduce if you do decide to buy something, see if you can buy less of it. See if you can reduce your consumption impacts more generally. Figure out what you need, and if you can get new items, perhaps secondhand. Sorry, so not new items. If you can get items secondhand, then repurpose what you have. So if you have something that breaks, see if you can use it in a new way. Or if you get a plastic bag from a grocery store, instead of just putting it in the trash, see if you can't reuse that plastic bag as many times as possible, which brings us to reuse. So you can repurpose, reuse, those often go together. Recycle. That's at the bottom because you want to prioritize all these other things. And if you must recycle, then recycle and make sure you do it properly. We do have a webinar on how to recycle. That's on our YouTube channel. So recycling can be really important if it's done well. Make sure everything is clean before you recycle. And then rot, which really shouldn't be at the bottom because it's important. But rotting is composting and letting food break down in ways that don't release methane, which is really important for methane is a very potent gas that can do sometimes more damage than carbon dioxide. So think about these things when you're consuming next in whatever way that looks like. Think about how you can either rethink or refuse or reduce any of these things. It's a whole set of tools that you can use. You can increase your activism. So these are two more photos from the beach cleanups. We have lots of happy participants, young and old. Anyone and everyone is welcome. I think sometimes people get thrown by the idea that you have to do this 2-hour beach cleanup. Not the case. There are really cool social media hashtags such as the 5-minute beach cleanup, Take 3 for the Sea, or our very own Go Green Wilmette Beach Cleanup. These are movements that you can join. So if you are, for example, hanging out on the beach with some friends, you can do a 5-minute beach cleanup. That's it. And that's you doing your part. And if you share, you can be, part of this global movement on social media, if that's your thing. But increasing your activism and sometimes even increasing awareness for others and leading by example can be really helpful in getting other people to join. Plenty of other options. Citizen science, Lara showed it. The balloon debris survey I've participated many times in finding and posting. See what citizen science you can get involved in. And even if it's not directly related to plastic and it's more tangentially related, that's okay. Do what you can. Do research on your watershed. So watershed is where our water is. It's what it sounds like. It's where our water is and where our water goes. And so figure out if you are by a river or a lake, where that ends up, if it stays in the lake, if it somehow makes its way to the ocean. All of these things are really important, and it's important to figure out where you are within your watershed. Talk to local restaurants and stores. COVID has made things tricky, and obviously, some businesses and stores are struggling financially and may not be able to make these shifts to things like renewable bags or no more straws or whatever it may be. But opening up that dialogue is really critical for getting more people to even start thinking about these things, right? And to start changing ways. So there's an interesting dichotomy that I think that shouldn't exist, where you either are doing a lot of work as an individual or the responsibility falls on the individual versus the responsibility falls on these organizations that produce plastic. I think that responsibility falls on both. It is absolutely true that these larger organizations, especially the ones Lara touched on, are responsible for the creation of plastic and for these huge levels of emissions. And we need to hold them accountable. So, for example, petitions for larger organizations to show transparency and get their act together is really important. But I also think it's important for us to participate in forms of activism that we can, because it's our way of kind of introducing ourselves. If you say, for example, okay, I might try a beach cleanup out, you may start getting more invested in the impact of pollution on your favorite place, whether that's the ocean or mountains or whatever it is. And that can be the stepping stone for increased activism. So I think that it's important to petition for larger organizations to stop doing what they're doing, but it's also important for individuals to do their part. Talk to local government, open up dialogues, figure out what rules are going on, figure out if plastic bills for banning plastic exist. See what you can do to help push those along. Donate to local wildlife rehab. I have to include that because wildlife is so impacted by plastic that it's really critical, if you are in the position to donate, that you do. They are swamped, especially in spring. Host a cleanup yourself. You do not have to live by the ocean, by the lake, by a river to do a cleanup. Trash eventually ends up in the water, so it's important to do cleanups wherever you are. What else? There are so many other things. I encourage you, as you're sitting there, to think about what else you could do, or things you've heard of, or forms of activism you can partake in. I forgot to mention marches and protests. There's so many things. So whatever you feel comfortable doing, especially as we're still in the pandemic, you can do. One other thing I like to do is get creative. So that bowl that I had in a previous slide where I was washing the microplastics, I was doing them to clean them off, not just washing microplastics in my room. So what I did was I separated them in this photo on the top left into colors. And then I separated them into whites and blacks and grays and browns. And you can see all these small dots on the left-hand side of this bottom left photo are nurdles. They're everywhere. And then in my family, we have a tradition of making a gift for one person every year. And so this particular year, 2018, I had my brother. And my family is from a variety of different places around the world. And so what I did was I made a flag using these plastics. So everything underneath, I colored it in, but everything underneath are these little lumps and bumps are plastic that I had picked up from the beach. So this is an example of upcycling. Even small pieces of trash and debris is a way that you can kind of get creative. And if you want to look up microplastic art, some artists are absolutely incredible. And then lastly, make it normal. Make these things like 5-minute beach cleanups, take 3 for the sea, beach cleanups in general, talking about plastic, getting involved, make that part of your normal life. So if you are going, for example, to watch the sunrise over Lake Michigan, I took this photo a few years ago. It was absolutely freezing, but absolutely worth it. When you're there, just do a quick pickup, right? Do things, find a way to build a habit in a way that makes sense for you to get involved. And in a sense, in a way that you can continue doing it and it becomes the norm, right? So I believe now we will take some questions. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and we can begin the Q&A session.
Okay, so I'm Beth Drucker, and I'm going to be helping to moderate the Q&A session tonight. Thank you for that presentation. It was, there's not a lot uplifting about plastic pollution, I'm afraid, other than, we do have the capacity to make a difference. And so thank you for the information that it helps make us aware of how dire the situation is and how we all need to be vocal and active to help. So we're going to start with the questions. Feel free to keep adding questions to the Q&A. So someone mentioned, Liz Kunkel from Goguen Winnetka mentioned that wildlife rehab places can reuse a lot of materials for their animal rescue. Not really a question, but she mentioned that if you find an old fur coat that no one wants to wear these days, they can use, I guess, to cuddle up animals in a wildlife rescue area.
That's a great. I'll add to that as well that old mascara wands, if you clean them super well, can be donated to wildlife rehab centers to pet animals that are smaller. It provides comfort. It's like a mother's touch. And so that's something that is really another kind of one of those random things that can be donated. And then old blankets and old towels as well are important. So yeah, thinking about how you can continue to give life to something you already own, but also help out a wildlife rehab center.
Okay, so Lara answered a couple of questions that I think are really important for us all to hear. Someone asked, I thought the whole balloon thing was fascinating, Lara. We have always associated balloons with celebrations and parties and positive things. And so that is a super important message. Someone wanted to know, well, are there any types of balloons that are safe to use? Do you want to answer that question for everyone, Lara, please?
Yeah, and unfortunately, I mean, if you're talking about releasing balloons, there are no safe balloons to release or to use outdoors, unfortunately. So yeah, just looking for other alternatives that you can use that would still be meaningful to you in some way. So you can blow bubbles, you can plant a tree if it's a special occasion. Trying to find something that would mean something to you that you can start a new tradition with, that would mean something special to you and your family.
We are all guilty of it. Some of us may have stopped buying them recently, but we've been going to grocery stores for years with Mylar balloons, at the ceilings, just tempting us to help celebrate events. So I was wondering whether or not, I'm not sure whether any listeners are involved in school PTOs. I'm not sure whether balloons are still being used in celebrations with school-age children, but maybe school green teams could help get that word out. You talk about a website, balloonsblow.org, with lots of ideas about alternatives. So I thought that was particularly interesting. Another person wanted to know, so is it a good thing that we're buying clothing that's made from plastic waste or bad?
I think Maria's got something to say. Basically, no. I mean, it's still going to release millions of microfibers every time you wash it. It's still plastic, unfortunately. So I mean, your best bet is to try to find clothing that is not synthetic, that does not have plastic. I mean, Maria, do you have something to add as well?
Yeah, it's such a tricky question because people get so excited. There are some really big brands that are really pushing this recycled, water bottles that have been made into sweatshirts and things like that. But ultimately, washing your clothes releases just so many, not just microplastics, but these are the plastics we end up ingesting because these small fibers just aren't picked up by the majority of water filtration systems worldwide. And so you're kind of drinking your own laundry a little bit, what you're producing. I think that this may be a good time to mention too that we all have synthetic clothing. Almost all of us have synthetic clothing. There are steps you can take to reduce the amount of plastic that your clothes shed. So there are things like Cora balls, for example. They are these balls that have these jagged edges inside, and when you put them in with your laundry, and they trap a lot of microplastics. There are filtration systems you can add to your washing machine that are very simple to install, and those again help trap microplastics. And so it's not the end solution, but it is something that you can do if you find that you have a lot of synthetic clothing, and you are wondering how you can help reduce that.
And there, I don't know if you've heard of guppy bags as well. It's a bag that you can use. You can put your clothes inside, and it actually catches all of the microfibers once you're done, and you can actually remove them and throw them in the trash, and so it doesn't get into the water system. So yeah, another way to kind of capture as many microfibers as you can.
So that leads to a question from Trudy Gibbs. She wants to know what the Wilmette water system is doing to try to capture these plastic pieces before it gets into the water supply. Maria, is that anything you've talked to them about?
I've talked to MWRD, so the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District. I did ask if they have anything at a webinar a couple years ago, maybe at this point, if they have any sort of solution so they can filter out microplastics, some microplastics. When it comes to those nanoplastics, really small microscopic pieces, they don't have anything yet. And I don't know, Lara, if you know, I'm not sure what technologies currently exist, what technologies are at a point where they're affordable for different organizations, or sorry, different cities, and I don't think that really exists right now. So my answer is, when I spoke with MWRD, is nothing yet.
Yeah, I mean, that's the problem. There's so much unknown about nanoplastics. I mean, they're so small that there's really no possible way for a water treatment system to capture. They're so small that they that they can enter your bloodstream, that they can get into your body. I mean, there's no way to filter that out at this point. The technology doesn't exist, unfortunately.
So some people would say, well, if I'm getting plastic through my tap water, maybe I should drink water out of plastic bottles. Do any of you have information about how much water we ingest from plastic water bottles?
Lara, I think it depends on where your water is bottled, like what the sources of the water. I know I just took a sip of water from my tap water, as you said that, so now I'm wondering how much I just ingested. But I think that's something that really depends, and that's something that will also probably depend on like each water bottle. Like things aren't distributed evenly in water, like bottle production. So a scary amount.
I don't know the exact amount, but I know it is a lot. And it's also, as Maria was saying, it also depends on the kind of plastic is used. And if you have a plastic bottle that's sitting out in the sun as well, that helps to degrade it a little bit more. It gets more plastic in the water before you drink it. But yeah, I can look and try to find if there's some exact numbers.
Okay, so you were talking about compostable plastic. I thought that was really interesting, Maria. Liz Kunkel brings up the fact that more and more of us are trying to collect food scraps and get them composted. And a lot of people use compostable plastic bags. Apparently, those are really causing problem. Even at our commercial composting facilities, they get tangled up in equipment. So plastic bags, whether they're compostable or not, are terrible when it comes to any kind of equipment. They cause breakdowns. It's a huge amount of labor. You have to cut them out. So if anyone is composting food, it's really good to find ways other than using compostable plastics, lining it with paper, just washing your bins more often. But your point that the compostable plastic is not as good a solution as it sounds was important for us to hear.
Right. Good.
Tom Wallace wants to know whether we can bring cloth bags to grocery stores now. Do any of you know the official answer to that?
So there was a study done by scientists way back, halfway through the pandemic, that found that there's no reason why you shouldn't be able to. They don't cause more transmission of the disease or anything like that. I think that Lara and I can only speak to Ann Arbor. Actually, that's not true. When I was in Wilmette about 3 weeks ago, I did bring my own bag. I think some grocery stores, for example, don't want you to if you bring your own bag, you must bag your own food, because I'm not sure where the logic is exactly, but that's what it is here in Ann Arbor as well. We do have a bulk store that has allowed us to bring our own bulk, like mason jars and bags and stuff like that. They've actually allowed that throughout the pandemic. And so I think it's really going to be dependent on where you live. I might try it and see. I think if anything, you'll just be asked to not use it. But I think at this point, probably most places are open. We've not had a problem in Ann Arbor for the last couple months.
Yeah, I think that's true here in Wilmette. And the most important thing is that we should all start taking our reusable bags again. And if they have hundreds of customers a day wanting to use them, that will help the shift. So someone wants to know, well, if I want to help and I don't live near a water or a beach, and Maria, you had mentioned it's so important that both of you mentioned any piece of plastic anywhere has the possibility of ending up in a water source. So picking up litter anywhere you are is important. So someone wants to know, someone just can't give up balloons, which, is hard. Can you use balloons if you ensure they don't get released into the air? What happens if you use them and you carefully you pop them and you put them in your garbage?
Yeah, no, of course. Yeah, no, I've got young nieces and nephews, and yeah, they still love balloons, and it's fun to have at their parties, and they still make them happy. So I mean, it's the best way to use them is have them inside, and then once you're done, carefully pop them and then put them in a closed plastic bag to be taken to the landfill. I mean, it's just, I mean, they of course can't be recycled, but yeah, I mean, if you can ensure that they will not be released outside, then yeah, I mean, I think you can still use them.
Yeah.
I would also say cut them and open them fully, because if an animal gets through, if you just pierce it and an animal gets through a hole, it will get stuck in that balloon and won't be able to escape. So rip it up fully so that it's flat, and then do what Lara said.
I wasn't sure how to take it when you told us that the law is that you can't release more than 50 balloons at a time, which means you can release 49 balloons over and over again perfectly legally.
Yeah, I know it's not ideal. Ideally, I would say, no balloons at all released. But I think it's a good step that it's going to bring awareness to the issue. I think more people might be.
Right. And the 40,000 balloons that get released in the Indy 500 is definitely something that should stop, right?
Yes. And
kind of like dyeing the river green. It's hard for some people to let go of festive traditions, even when they're harmful. So I love the 5-minute beach cleanup, Maria. You turned me on to that years ago. If anyone's interested, is on Instagram, it's very gratifying to see how 5-minute beach cleanup connects people all over the world doing this work. And they show people who just got inspired, and a lot of them spent a lot more than 5 minutes doing it, but where they'll show before and after pictures of huge amounts of plastic that have been cleaned up by volunteers. Okay, so how do you balance the desire to not pollute with buying necessities and some luxuries?
Yeah, I think
either one of you can take that.
I think that that if we try to deny ourselves all of the luxuries, it's like a diet, right? If you try and say, I'm completely cutting out sugar and pasta and bread, which are my favorite things. If you say you're trying to completely cut that out, you're going to fail, right? And so if you try and cold turkey give up all the luxuries that you like, it's not going to go well. So that's where I think the concept of intentional consumerism, intentional consumption comes in. So if you are getting yourself something that you really enjoy, or if you're ordering takeout and you know that that takeout is going to come in a styrofoam box, but you also want to support your local business because of the pandemic, and so you're not sure what to do, it's okay. If you're intentional and thoughtful about what you're doing, I think almost always there will be a reduction in consumption. Or you can find, if you're saying, I really can't give this up. For example, the balloon example, I really can't give up balloons, but I I'm interested in all of this. You can find ways to, I can't give up balloons, I'll participate in these beach cleanups to clean up any balloons I do find. Or I don't want to, you know, I really like using straws and I'm going to continue using them at restaurants. Okay, that's fine. Then maybe consider bringing a reusable bag to the grocery store. So I think that there's trade-offs, and I think that those are easier to come up with when you are intentionally consuming or choosing not to consume something. So I think one of the dangerous things in this whole zero waste movement, which aims to reduce plastic, is the idea that you have to be perfect. It's not going to work. So I think being really thoughtful about what you do is probably the best answer.
Okay, so Anne Treadway Googled it already. She was interested in the guppy bags that help capture the lint. And then you also talked about the Cora ball. Do they do the same thing differently?
Yeah, their intention is to both, right, Lara, capture. I have a Cora ball, and so when you take it out of the washing machine, you take off the microplastics that have been entrapped in those teeth that you can look it up. It's kind of cool. But yeah, the intention is to both, and then the guppy bag collects it in the bag wall. What is?
Yeah, no, it collects it in the bag. It's an enclosed bag, you zip it, and then as soon as you're done with the laundry, you unzip it, and at the very top, there's maybe a filter or an attachment where the microfibers attach, and you can just kind of clean it off and then put it in the trash.
So kind of like cleaning the filter off your dryer.
Yes, exactly.
Right. Okay. So they want to know when we collect the plastic on the beach, you know, what do we do with it? Does it all get thrown out, Maria?
So if there are recyclable items like plastic water bottles or cans or glass bottles, you can take them home and recycle them. If you stick them right in a recycling bin without rinsing off the sand, that entire bin will likely be sent to the landfill because it's contaminated and can't be recycled. If you clean it off well, then it can be recycled if it's a recyclable item. It's one of the downsides of the whole beach cleanup idea is that, yes, this stuff goes out of the water and back to the landfill. If it can be upcycled, for example, with the beach microplastic art, a lot of people are doing that. It's quite fun. If it can be upcycled, then of course it's not going to go back to the landfill. But when it is cleaned up, the way that we do it in Wilmette is first of all, we encourage everyone to bring buckets instead of plastic bags. We don't need to add more plastic to the issue. And so we have people empty their buckets into the trash cans provided at the beach, and those eventually will go to the landfill. So there's no clean answer. It's not a good answer. It's a sad answer. And that's where it comes to reducing consumption as being an important thing for all of us to do.
Okay, thanks. So we just have a couple of moments. Someone just mentioned, Marcia mentioned that the Jewel in Wilmette does allow you to bring your own cloth bags.
Beautiful.
One of the best tips I ever got was from a woman who said that when she is at the grocery store or any store and she realizes that she's forgotten her bags in the car, what she says is, don't give me the plastic or the paper bags. I'll put stuff back in the cart and I'll unload it into my own car.
Yeah.
Or even if you don't have the bags in your car, you can put a lot of things just in the back seat and eliminate. And it's pretty exciting once you start thinking, wow, I eliminated 5 bags today. I didn't take 3 bags, the day before. Another thing, when we start going back to restaurants, always take your own take home containers, because that's a way you can really significantly cut back on plastic waste. We've just have to keep saying no more and more. I love the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act, since this is such a big deal. Laura, can you tell us about it one more time, and what can a average person do to help promote that federal law?
Yeah, let me just go back to my slides. It's getting all day.
Okay,
so yeah,
it's 8:24. So Maria, then you will finish up.
Sounds good.
Okay. All right, so yeah, the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act. Basically, what you can do is just call your representatives and demand that they pass this law. It pauses all new plastic facilities. Big Oil they're planning 17 new petrochemical facilities in the next few decades. So there's a lot of potential for new facilities, and these need to be stopped and prevented from being built. So this bill, this Pollution Act also makes big polluters take responsibility for their products. It holds them accountable. It also stops shipping plastic waste to developing countries, which still occurs. A lot of our plastic waste is now going to Western Africa and causing a devastating impact over there. This bill also requires big polluters like Coca-Cola, Pepsi, Nestle, all of the big polluters to actually fund recycling, do what they've claimed all of these years, and help with composting. So this is a huge deal that really could help shape the next decades. So it's incredibly important. And yeah, one thing you could do is just reach out to your representatives.
And I understand that there are laws like that in many other countries, both developed and less developed than the United States, and that we are lagging significantly behind other countries in putting restrictions on plastic.
Yes, yeah, no, that's true. And also shipping plastic overseas. A lot of countries have banned that. Unfortunately, the United States still continues to do that. So there's a lot of things that we are very far behind, and that needs to change.
Okay. Well, I want to, before Maria concludes, want to thank both of you for all your work in this incredibly important area and for your willingness to create these presentations and share with our audience tonight. Maria, and kudos to Maria, who came to us right out of college and said, I want to start beach cleanups in Wilmette. And we said, all right, go for it. And sure enough, she did it. So that's been very exciting to watch her able to do something that she felt really, really passionate about and get so many people to volunteer for it. If you do not get the Go Green Wilmette newsletter, please go to our website and sign up for it. And if you're interested in specific reminders about the beach cleanups, which are in addition to the newsletter, we can send you a reminder at 6 in the morning. So when you wake up and have your first cup of coffee, you'll be reminded of a beach cleanup. So Maria, will you tell people when we do that this summer and how people can watch this webinar and our other webinars?
Absolutely. So the beach cleanups are every 2 weeks. We just had one this past weekend. So the next one won't be this weekend, it will be next weekend. And as Beth said, feel free to reach out to Go Green Wilmette if you want to be added to that list, and we'd be happy to do so. Otherwise, they're from 9 to 11 a.m. as long as you want to be there every other Saturday. Yep, that's kind of, they're very simple, nothing much to talk about there, but we hope that you come, stay for as long as you want or as little as you want.
Oh, Maria, one thing, could you tell us quickly, it's 8:27, what the Park District does to clean plastic off our beaches or trash off our beaches?
The Park District has a sort of a tractor-like machine. That's not a really good description, but it's a machine, a car-ish thing that they drive down the beach, and it has a rake attached to it that's able to scoop up the plastic as it goes over it. At least the top layer of plastic. And that's then removed from the beach. And so when you go to beaches like Gilson's swimming beach, it'll look very smooth. And that's because a lot of the larger pieces of plastic have been removed and taken off the beach and prevented from going in the lake, which is really fantastic. Yeah, it is.
Okay, so we're looking into, we're hoping that people are developing better and better machinery to collect smaller and smaller pieces of plastic. And so we're doing a little bit of research about that. You know, many countries would give anything if they had the kind of equipment that Wilmette does that keeps our beach clean. But in order to get the very, very small pieces of plastic, the volunteer beach cleanups are really, really important.
Absolutely. So we hope that this webinar has been helpful and inspired you to take action in a way that works for you, whether that's through cleanups or signing petitions or rethinking your consumption habits. I want to give a huge thank you to Lara for participating in this webinar and for Beth for doing the Q&A. And so again, reminder that we have an upcoming webinar also in June about composting. You can register for that at goinggreenmatters.org. And then we have webinars in the future. Again, everything can be found on goinggreenmatters.org. We also will have this recording posted to YouTube very shortly, and you will get an email when that has been posted to YouTube. And then for any other Go Green Wilmette events, check out our website at gogreenwilmette.org, and you will be able to see those, and also follow us on social media. We have Instagram, which is at Go Green Wilmette, Facebook, which is Go Green Wilmette, and I believe we have a Twitter now, right, Beth? Is it also at Go Green Wilmette?
I don't even know.
It's a work in art.
But I did tweet. I have tweeted twice this week.
You sent a tweet. That's really good. Or you tweeted. So follow us on those, and thank you everyone for attending this webinar and asking great questions.
Great. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.